One man hunches over a desk in a dim room and scribbles a single insight that breaks an unbreakable code. That's the image most people carry of World War II code breaking, a flash of solitary genius that turned the tide of the war. It's a clean, cinematic story, and it's almost entirely wrong. The real work behind cracking Nazi Germany's ciphers wasn't a moment of brilliance. It was years of repetitive, exhausting labor, carried out by thousands of people history barely remembers. By the time the war ended, almost none of them had a name attached to what they'd done. At its peak, the code-breaking operation based at Bletchley Park employed close to 10,000 people. Roughly 3 out of every 4 of them were women. Most weren't mathematicians or cryptographers. They were clerks, typists, and machine operators, recruited for stamina, not genius. Their job was rarely a sudden breakthrough. It was checking thousands of possible machine settings against intercepted messages, one tedious combination at a time. On a single day, the operation could process tens of thousands of intercepted messages, almost all of which led nowhere. A single useful break could take an entire shift of repetitive cross-referencing to produce. Many workers spent the war doing the same narrow task, day after day, without ever seeing the full picture. They weren't told what their work led to, only that it had to be finished by a deadline, every single day. Shifts ran around the clock, in cramped huts that were freezing in winter and stifling in summer. Workers were rotated between shifts so quickly that exhaustion, not boredom, became the operation's biggest occupational hazard. And the breaks that did happen rarely came from outsmarting the machine itself. They came from exploiting the predictable habits of the humans operating it. German operators reused the same settings, sent near-identical weather reports, and signed off with predictable phrases. That repetition, not raw mathematical genius, gave codebreakers their most reliable openings. The machine was formidable, but the humans running it were careless in very ordinary, exploitable ways. Decoding a single day's traffic took a coordinated relay of specialists, machines, and manual cross-checks, not one person's insight. It was assembly line work, disguised decades later as a story about one brilliant mind. None of these workers received public credit for decades, including many who pioneered techniques still used in code-breaking today. Some lived out their post-war lives in towns that never knew what their quiet, unremarkable-looking job during the war had actually been. If the truth was thousands of anonymous workers grinding through repetitive checks, why do we remember one genius instead? Partly, it's because secrecy made the real story impossible to tell for decades. Britain's Official Secrets Act kept Bletchley Park's work classified until the 1970s. For 30 years, the people who worked there couldn't tell their own families what they'd actually done. When the story finally surfaced, almost no detailed records of the day-to-day labor survived to fill the silence. What survived instead were a handful of names attached to a few genuinely exceptional breakthroughs. Even official histories written immediately after declassification still leaned on a small cast of named figures to keep the story readable. It's easier to publish a biography than to credit 10,000 people in a single sentence. Storytellers had every incentive to simplify a sprawling, anonymous operation into a single heroic arc. A lone genius against an evil machine is a story. 10,000 clerks doing repetitive shift work is a logistics report. Film and television naturally gravitated toward the version with a face and a clear turning point. By the time secrecy lifted, the surviving cultural memory had already settled around the few public figures the press could attach a name to. Over time, the dramatized version became the only version most people ever encountered. That same myth still shapes how we talk about breakthroughs today. Tech history tends to credit a single visionary founder with inventing a world-changing product almost overnight. In reality, most major tech breakthroughs come from large, often invisible teams. Behind any major AI system are thousands of data labelers, annotators, and engineers doing painstaking, repetitive work most users never hear about. Their job, like the code breakers before them, is unglamorous pattern checking at enormous scale. A single breakthrough announcement is usually just the visible tip of years of anonymous, grinding labor underneath it. We still prefer the founder's keynote to the spreadsheet of unnamed contributors who actually made that keynote possible. Investor pitch decks and press coverage both reward a single charismatic face over a long list of contributors. The incentive to simplify hasn't gone away. It's just moved industries. It's a more flattering story for the people at the top, and a more forgettable one for everyone who did the actual work. But forgettable doesn't mean unimportant. It means undercounted. The lone genius narrative survives in both stories because it's simply easier to tell than the truth. Picture that hunched figure from the opening again, alone in a dim room, having a single flash of insight. Now replace him with a crowded hall of clerks, repeating the same check for the 1,000th time that week. That second image is the one that actually won the intelligence war. Not one brilliant mind defeating a machine, but thousands of overlooked people patiently outlasting human carelessness. The myth gave us a hero. The evidence gives us something more honest, and arguably more impressive. The intelligence war wasn't won by genius. It was won by patience, multiplied by thousands.